Hello and welcome. So the knife blade was just released for the Cricut Maker and we're here to talk all about it. So first we're going to get into what the knife blade is and what the difference is between this and other blades, why it's just for the Cricut Maker, and some tips and tricks you need to know before you use it. Then we'll get into some of the materials that we cut with the knife blade and some of the other blades. So if you've ever wanted to cut thicker materials with your Cricut Maker machine, this is the video for you. Let's start with a little about the Cricut blades and what makes the knife blade so special. First of all, the standard Cricut fine point blade is the one that comes with your Cricut Maker machine and all other Cricut machines. It does not have a gear at the top, so just a standard case that looks something like this. And the blade sticks out not very far as it is a fine point blade. Also, with the Maker machine, it also comes with a Rotary Blade. So a Rotary Blade is great for cutting fabric because it's circular, and it has that gear at the top to allow it to turn while cutting, which makes it really, really nice. Now, you can also buy a deep cut blade, and the deep cut blade can be purchased for the Maker or for other Cricut machines, and it's similar to the fine point blade, except that it sticks out slightly more than the fine point blade does. Now, the newest offering from Cricut is the knife blade. The knife blade, again, only fits the Maker machine because it has this gear at the top, and it is almost like a craft knife or X-Acto knife in that it's pointed and is a longer blade. So you can compare that to the deep cut and the fine point and see that you can get a much deeper cut. Then with this gear, that allows it to turn and pivot while cutting to get a really great cut. You can go backwards, forwards, and at different pressures as well in order to get you the best cut possible. Now for details on the Maker machine when you're using the knife blade. First of all, when you first open your Maker machine, it's going to look something like this. So the knife blade goes in this housing, and when you open your machine, you will see these white wheels along the bar, and they're usually evenly spaced across the bar. You may not even know these move if you haven't used the knife blade or a similar cut. Now, what they recommend when you're using the knife blade to cut materials like chipboard and foam and thicker materials is to take these wheels and move them all the way to the right. And they easily slide over, so it's very easy to do. Now, why do they recommend that? I ran one piece, and what they recommend is only cutting 11 inches wide so that you avoid this area then that has all of the wheels stacked. Now what I did was cut a 12-inch wide piece just to show you what the wheels do, and you may be able to see that they mar the surface of the material. This is just a piece of chipboard, and the wheels marred the surface. So what would happen is if you left those wheels in place, you would get mar lines down your material as it cut in the Cricut Maker. The next thing you need to know about using the knife blade refers to the mat. So for a majority of these thick materials, you're going to want to buy the purple mat, which is a strong grip. The green mat also works on some thinner materials, but mostly for the knife blade you need the strong grip mat. And the recommendation from Cricut is to put your material down. Now we just talked about moving those wheels so that it does not mar the surface of your material, so you need to be sure to do that. We also talked about how the wheels will be to the side, so be sure your material is only 11 inches wide so those wheels have room on the side to roll. Now you want to press your material down really well. You can use your hands. Cricut also makes a brayer that's great for this, and you can rub the material down really well. And then they also recommend taking masking or painter's tape and securing those corners. Now you will need to make sure that the corners are not in your cut line, or to only get that very edge tip of the corner so that the cut is not there. Now the cut will be about a ½ inch in from this side, ½ inch down from the top, so that area will not have any cut, so this should be fine. you just want to put that masking tape in all 4 corners just to help hold that material down as the knife blade works. Now, you will also notice when you're using your knife blade, the knife blade goes multiple passes, and they are calibrated for each material so that it goes at a different pressure with each pass. Now, you could have up to 20 passes for something like wood or a heavy chipboard. And what it's going to do at the very end is the machine is going to push your mat out, but still leave it slightly in the machine. And it's going to ask you if the material is cut all the way through. If it's not cut all the way through, you can actually tell the Cricut machine to do another pass, and you can repeat that until the material is cut all the way through. Now, how do you check if something's cut all the way through without removing it from your machine and without removing it from the mat? A great tool for that is your weeding tool. As it's sticking out of the machine, you can just barely lift the corner of the cut piece and kind of feel and see if it's cut all the way through. If it's cut all the way through or almost all the way through, maybe there's just a small area that's not cut all the way through, go ahead and remove it from your machine. And that small area that's not cut all the way through, use something like a craft knife to finish the cut manually. That way you won't ruin your mat, because that can be an issue, ruining your mat with by cutting too much on a material like this. You could actually cut through the mat itself or into the mat, and that would hurt the life of the mat itself. So let's watch the Cricut cut with the knife blade just a minute, just so you can see that action of the knife blade turning as it cuts. Here's a close-up of the actual turning on tight curves. So now that you know a little bit about the blade itself, let's get into some materials. So all I did was look up what materials the knife blade would cut and try different ones of those. So when you pick a material with your Cricut Maker, the machine actually tells you what blade you should use. So I went with those recommendations in some cases. So if it tells you one blade and you want to use another, sometimes there's the option to choose another blade and a link there, and you can pick another blade. Other times there's not even an option. So let's talk about each of the materials and what options were available. Alright, let's start with craft foam. I've had quite a few questions about cutting craft foam with the Cricut Maker. So I have 3 different thicknesses of craft foam that I actually cut. The first is 1.5 millimeters thick, and it's a glitter foam. So when I picked glitter foam on the Cricut Maker in Cricut Design Space, it actually asks for the fine point blade. And I actually just use a standard green mat to put my foam down on. Now, I cut a heart in a lot of these cases just because the heart has wide circular pieces, so we could see how the knife blade did on a curve, as well as a fine point in the center, so we could see how it did on a point, and then the point at the end. So it was just a basic shape that worked really well for the test. Now we'll talk a little bit more about the blade here in a little while, because I did try to put it to the test of how intricate the cuts could be. So they recommend that you have cuts with details no smaller than 3/4 of an inch when using a knife blade. So that's a pretty big detail. But I did put it through some tests, and I got some pretty good cuts on some detailed pieces, but some not so great cuts on some really fine detail pieces. So you might have to play with the designs you use and the knife blade, and I hope to have some released soon that you can use for your own crafts. So the 1.5 millimeter craft foam, glitter foam, fine point blade did wonderfully cutting with the Cricut Maker. Now, one thing to be said about craft foam. When the Maker cuts the craft foam, when you remove it from the machine, you may not think it cut all the way through, but you can literally just punch it out with your finger as long as it's cut through a majority of the foam itself. It's just such an easy material to work with that it just kind of punches through if it's scored at all. So that's one thing to note, that it may look like it's not cut all the way through, but just punching it out with your finger results in a great cut that you can use for your craft projects. Right, next, 2 millimeter craft foam. So 2 millimeter craft foam is the foam that you most likely find at your craft store. So it's just kind of the standard craft foam that we use to craft with our kids. And it's readily available in tons of craft stores and online. And this actually had two options for cutting. So the first was the deep cut blade, and then I was able to choose the blade and change to the knife blade. So with the deep cut blade and the 2mm craft foam, I noticed that the front or top, the cut was slightly jagged, but on the inside or on the bottom, the cut was perfectly smooth. So I did get some jagged edges on my heart shape when cutting craft foam with the deep cut blade. So then I put my knife blade to the test. So same craft foam, but with the knife blade, and the cuts were perfect, absolutely perfect. Both edges all the way around. I was really impressed. So what is the difference? Like, what could be the difference between the two? So could my deep cut blade have been a little dull, and perhaps my knife blade was not? Yes, that could be. So the deep cut blade does not have that gear at the top to move the blade. So literally the deep cut blade, the machine is dragging it through my piece. And I had trouble with the deep cut blade on several occasions because it's doing that dragging motion. It pulls the material, and I seem to experience this jagged cut, especially on these thicker materials. The knife blade, however, can lift, say on curves or where it comes to a point, and pivot itself to a different position. And the knife blade also, whereas the deep cut blade might cut a couple of passes, 2 or 3 passes, it always goes in the same direction. The knife blade can start in different places. It can turn itself to cut in a different direction. So it just results in a much better cut than the deep cut blade. So if you're cutting craft foam, especially if you're doing intricate designs or where you want a really clean cut, I would say the knife blade wins. Next, we have 3mm craft foam. So the 3mm craft foam, it also, first of all, there's just a craft foam setting within Cricut Design Space. The website itself told me that the knife blade would cut 3mm craft foam. 3mm craft foam is actually above the thickness that is recommended on the Maker. So the Maker is rated up to 2.4 millimeters, but they say it can cut 3mm craft foam because the craft foam, of course, is pliable and shrinks slightly when going under your roller. So I picked a couple of different options to try to cut the 3mm foam. The first option I picked was EVA foam because I googled that and it seemed like it would be thick enough, but it didn't work at all. So I would not recommend the EVA foam setting. So then I picked the craft foam setting, and you can pick your pressure. So your pressure is set to default when you pick craft foam, and you can set the pressure to more or less. So I set the pressure to more since this is slightly more thicker, and then I again cut with both the deep cut blade as well as the knife blade to see the comparison once again. Once again, on the deep cut blade, I got a really jagged edge, and it was more pronounced on the thicker foam than it was with the thinner. On the 3mm foam with the knife blade, the cut was cleaner, but it was slightly jagged. And we talked a little bit about before how maybe it doesn't cut all the way through, but you can just punch it through with your finger. That's what happened in this case. So it was most of the way through, and I just punched it the rest of the way with your finger. Now, at the beginning of this video, we talked about how when the knife blade completes a cut, it asks you if it's cut all the way through, and you can opt to send the material around for another pass. You can absolutely do that in this case. Maybe another pass or two would have resulted in a cleaner cut, but this is the Cricut settings and what resulted with that. So again, knife blade won with a cleaner cut with not as much of a jagged edge as the deep cut blade. Alright, now I just wanted to go into a few things because I've had some questions. So craft foam also comes in a 5mm thick, which is a really thick craft foam. This foam will not physically fit into the Cricut Maker. It just doesn't go under the roller. So you can't cut really thick 5mm foam. I've also had some questions about foam board. So just the board that has a foam core, find it in the poster board section. This is a black version that comes in white and a variety of colors. So it has a foam core in between with two like paper sides. This also is too thick to fit under the rollers of the Cricut Maker, so you cannot cut foam board. Alright, so felt. I've cut a ton of felt with mostly the Rotary Blade. I've cut the Cricut felt tons of times. I've cut regular felt, like cheap felt. You can head back on my YouTube channel and find videos on all of that. But I wanted to do some experiments with stiff felt, but I've never cut it before. So why not? This is a great time. Now, the stiff felt does not pull up a suggestion for the knife blade. So the suggestions were just the fine point blade or the Rotary Blade. Now, I did find that the fine point blade left the heart slightly in the felt, so I kind of had to push it out, and that resulted in some like frayed edges or pieces that were like where the threads were coming out of the felt. With the Rotary Blade, however, perfect cut. So if you're looking to cut stiff felt, I think it says on the knife blade page that the knife blade will cut stiff felt, but the Rotary Blade works great. It comes with your Cricut Maker already, not another blade to buy. So if you're looking to cut stiff felt, I would definitely recommend the Rotary Blade. Alright, next is magnet material. So magnet material, they say it will cut, and it's a 0.6 millimeter magnet material setting is what I used for this material. And it actually just pulled up the deep cut blade. So it didn't even give the knife blade as an option. The deep cut blade actually worked great. I have no problems at all. So if you're looking to cut magnet material, I just buy the deep cut blade. Don't even worry about the knife blade. Right, next is cardboard. So I'm super excited, right, that it'll cut cardboard. That sounds amazing. So first of all, Cricut makes a cardboard. So it's basically like a corrugated sheet, and it comes in 12 by 12 sheets and different colors. So I went ahead and put this in first. So for the Cricut corrugated sheets, cardboard is what they're calling this. It actually just calls for the fine point blade, and the fine point blade worked great. So it's basically like thick paper, and the cut was perfect. So if you want to cut the Cricut cardboard sheets, you just need the fine point blade. The knife blade's not needed. But I thought, what would happen if I cut a box? Like, not a cereal box, not a thin box, a really thick box. So this is actually like a paper box that my paper came in, and I just tore a piece off of that and ran it through the Maker. And what I did was I picked, so there's a heavy chipboard setting that calls for the knife blade, and it actually calls for 20 passes. And then you can stop the machine anytime you want if you see that it's almost cut through. And one trick is to, while it's cutting, say it's gone 5 passes and you think, boy, that looks like it's cut through. You can just hit pause and then use your weeding tool to kind of lift up the edge and see if it's cut all the way through. So what I ended up with on this heavy cardboard was 5 passes. 5 passes with the knife blade on the heavy chipboard setting, and it cut perfectly. I'm really excited about this. If you love recycle crafts, the knife blade might just be for you. Like, can you imagine all the crafts you can make out of cardboard pieces when you can cut them into great shapes? And I hate cutting cardboard with scissors. Like, it's almost impossible to do. So this was one that I was really excited to see. All right, next is mat board. So mat board is what you get at the hobby or craft store, and it's designed to make picture frame mats out of. So I bought some 4-ply mat board because it's the thickest, and I thought I would make the Cricut Maker to the test with the knife blade and just see how intricate of a cut I could get. So I started with this mat, and the mat board always calls for the knife blade, and it does about 8 passes. So this is the mat that I cut out of a piece of mat board. So it's perfectly cut, and the cuts are fairly intricate. Not overly intricate, but enough of a test that I thought, boy, this is awesome that I can make my own picture frame mats, right? So the one thing I wanted to say about this was that the very bottom cut wasn't just quite all the way through. Like, it was just barely not through. But the rest of the cuts were fine. So I went ahead and removed it from my machine. And then I just used a craft knife and just manually made that final cut right on the back to cut through that very last layer on the mat board and to remove my mat from the machine. Now, you can opt to have, like I said, it'll ask you, and you can opt to have the Cricut Maker do one more pass and finish that cut. But beware that it'll probably cut into your mat on all the other cuts, and I just didn't want to ruin my mat at that time. So that's the first mat I cut. And then I thought I would go a little, maybe more detailed, and I cut this fun dad mat. So this would be cute with pictures for Father's Day in each of the holes. And again, cuts were perfect. Had a little trouble like across the bottom and a few other little cuts, and I just used my craft knife to finish those off. Again, you can hit the button, let it go another pass, and it'll probably come out perfectly. So then I went way overboard, okay? I thought, what if I went really intricate and just see what it can do? Like, let's just skip all this, let's just see what happens. So I did this mat. So this mat has tons of detail on the inside. It's meant for graduation. It says I did it across the front. Now this one, I had to do a ton of work to get it to look like this. It did not cut good at all. And all these fine details, it would be cut along the long lines, but the small lines that are on the sides, it wouldn't be cut all the way through, like, at all. And I mean, it looks okay, but it's just not as perfect as I would like it to be. And the back is horrible where the material tore as I was trying to remove it. So I would definitely say that stick to the recommendations of the details no smaller than 3/4 of an inch, or just go a little past that and push it a little bit to, you know, the finer detail, but don't go as far as I did maybe on this project. So that's just because I like to test things so that you don't have to. So that was one of my tests. Alright, chipboard. So chipboard is so exciting to cut. So the first thing that the Cricut Maker will cut is a fine chipboard. A fine, or light chipboard, excuse me. And it is 0.37 millimeters thick. And it just recommends the fine point blade for that. It actually did 2 passes across this and it came out perfectly. So if you're using a fine chipboard or a thin chipboard, 0.37 millimeters thick, then the fine point blade works great. Then I went to a heavy chipboard. So this heavy chipboard is 2 millimeters thick, and it's really thick, can be used for tons of different projects. So the first attempt I made at cutting this chipboard is this top one, and as you can see, it's not even removed. So what happened was the knife blade got stuck during the cut and the machine stopped, and it tells you that the knife blade got stuck and that you'll have to restart your cut, and it removed itself. And then the mat was removed. I removed the mat from the machine and I started the cut again lower. The second cut worked perfectly. So 2 millimeter chipboard worked perfectly. Now this does a lot of passes. This does 20 passes. The thicker the material, the longer the knife blade is going to take to cut. So first thing to keep in mind when you're thinking about doing a project with thicker material. The second thing to keep in mind is the more detailed your project is, the longer it takes to cut. So we just talked about that mat board. And this mat that I did as an experiment with all this fine detail. This took like 50 minutes to cut. So just so you know that your projects with the knife blade may take longer to cut because it's doing all those passes and all that great work to get you your perfect piece out of chipboard and thicker materials. And one thing to mention on this one, I did actually send it through for one more pass. So it did 20 passes, and then I sent it through for one more, and because it just was not fully released from the material. So it actually took 21 passes. So just so you know about that. So now let's talk about cutting wood. I'm sure that you're excited about this part. So the Cricut Maker will cut balsa wood and basswood. You can find wood sheets like this in your local craft store. They'll say balsa or bass right on them, and also the thickness. So balsa wood, the Maker will cut 1/32, 1/16, and 3/32. So I can only find 1/16 and 3/32. The very thinnest piece I actually couldn't find, but if it'll cut the thicker stuff, I'm sure it'll cut the thinner stuff perfectly. I started with 1/16 inch balsa wood. If you've never used balsa wood before, it's a really, really lightweight wood. So I cut the heart again out of the 1/16 balsa. You will need to absolutely follow the recommendations for this about putting it on that strong grip mat and adding the tape to the edges. Like this, the chipboard, materials like that, you definitely need to follow those recommendations. The balsa 1/16, it does recommend the knife blade, and it does about 4 passes. And this was perfectly cut after 4 passes, didn't have any issues. Then I went to the 3/32 balsa, and it recommends the knife blade and does about 7 passes. Again, perfect cut, was very happy with the results. Now, basswood. Basswood is a little bit of a denser wood, more like you would be used to when you think about cutting wood. So the knife blade is rated to cut 1/32 basswood and 1/16 basswood. So I started with 1/32 basswood. Again, it recommends the knife blade, and it actually takes 18 passes to cut the 1/32 basswood with the maker and the knife blade. Now, these woods, I did want to mention this, they come in a variety of widths, but you might not be able to find the width you want. So the widest I could find was this one right here. And actually, the widest in the 1/32 bass that I could find was this one. So you may not be able to get the width you want, so you might check on that before you get your heart set on a project that you can't actually make. So 1/32 basswood, cut fine, knife blade 18 passes. And the 1/16 basswood, again, called for the knife blade, and it did 14 passes, cut perfectly. I was super impressed with the cutting of wood and the knife blade and the maker. All the project possibilities are just dancing in my head with what I can do with this now that I can cut wood with my Cricut Maker. Now, moving on to leather. So you might want to cut leather with your Cricut Maker. So the first thing I would tell you is to put the leather rough side down. Now, you may see different recommendations as far as that goes. I could not get it to cut with the smooth side down on the mat. I couldn't get it to stick to the mat well enough. So all my cuts were with the rough side down. And why people recommend cutting with the smooth side down is that the rough side down makes your mat a mess. So first of all, with leather, you have to have, I don't think you can cut it without the strong grip mat. I tried, I don't think you can do it. So you're gonna need a strong grip mat. You may need a new strong grip mat. And cutting with the rough side down leaves all this little fuzz all over your mat. You can try to clean it with like water and a rag, but just be careful not to wipe away all your adhesive. What I like to do, Cricut makes a strong grip transfer tape, and I like to just peel off a piece of it, stick it down to the mat really well and rub it, and then peel it back. It like lifts up all these little pieces and makes the mat cleaner. So that's just one tip when working with leather. Alright, so the first thing I did, so Cricut actually has real leather, and it's one of their products, and so the first thing I did was grab the Cricut leather and try to cut it first. So the Cricut leather itself, when you pick it in Cricut Design Space, it recommends the deep cut blade. It will not let you pick another blade for the Cricut leather. I tried multiple times, multiple mats, multiple deep cut blades, because I had a few different ones, and I never could get a good cut with the deep cut blade on the Cricut leather. So I switched my settings, and I switched it to garment leather, and then it let me pick the knife blade, and the knife blade went 4 passes on the Cricut leather, and then I did 1 extra pass because it wasn't cut all the way through, and the results were stunning. So if you want to cut leather, I would recommend the knife blade and using like the garment leather setting. Now, there is different settings for leather depending on the weight of leather you are using. So you might want to pick a heavier weight if yours is heavier than this, but the lightest weight garment leather worked great with the Cricut leather. So then, like, what if you don't want to buy the Cricut leather? So I actually bought a bag of leather scraps at the craft store, which is super affordable, and I cut one of those scraps. So this is the scrap piece. So it was already cut out like this because it's a scrap, and I cut a heart out of the center. Again, I picked the garment leather setting. It let me pick the knife blade. It went 4 passes. I had to do 1 extra pass to cut it all the way through, and the cut was perfect. So with regular garment leather, results are just the same as with your Cricut leather. Now, it does have some tooled leather settings, and so I picked up some leather Bookmarks, which is like a really stiff leather, and I thought, well, let's try to cut it. So I did cut a really small heart out of this because this was a small piece because it's intended to be a bookmark, and it worked really well. I maybe should have gone 1 more pass with it. I actually, it did 6 passes, and I thought it was cut all the way through. There were just a few little areas that were not, and I finished those off with just a craft knife. So just be warned that you might need an extra pass on that as well. Alright, so why not push it just a little bit and see what other materials I could do, right? So I thought about like a plastic sheet, but plastic sheets, I don't know if you've ever tried to cut them. Like just a standard plastic sheet is horrible. When you cut it, it does all this, like just breaks off, and it's horrible to cut. So I was looking for another material that might be easier to cut, or something that would work with the Cricut Maker. So this is actually, it's a new material that was released at CHA this year. It's actually a heat form material, and I hope to do some projects with it really soon. But it cuts amazingly. Just with a pair of scissors, you get amazing cuts. So, could the Cricut Maker and the knife blade cut it? So I decided to give it a try. So what I did was use the heavy chipboard setting. So first of all, let me talk about experimenting with other materials. The heavy chipboard setting is the perfect way to do that. The heavy chipboard setting goes 20 passes, and it calls for the knife blade. So you can set that. Be sure to use that strong grip mat, especially on materials like this. Get them down really well. Tape those edges. Use the knife blade, heavy chipboard setting. It'll set up for 20 passes, and as it's going through, you can pause your machine, use your weeding tool, and pick it up and see if it's cut all the way through. And then you can mark how many passes it actually took down on a piece of paper so you know later. So with this heat form material, that's what I did, and I ended up stopping at 17 because yes, it cut all the way through. So this is like a thick plasticky material, and then you can heat form it into different shapes, you know, like bend it if you wanted to make a bowl or that type of thing. So I'm so excited about the possibilities with this material and being able to cut it with the Cricut Maker. So I'm definitely going to be playing with this one, so stay tuned for projects with this one as well. So hopefully that gave you all the details you needed about the Cricut knife blade and cutting thicker materials with your Cricut Maker, regardless if it's with the knife blade or another blade. So if you love this video, be sure to give us a thumbs up on YouTube. Comment below if you have any questions. So was there a material I missed? Did I miss something on the list that you want to see me cut? Leave a comment below, and hopefully I can get to that in a future video. This knife blade has so much potential, and I'd love to put it to the test for you, so be sure to comment with materials that you want to see cut with the knife blade. So thank y'all so much for joining me today. Be sure to subscribe on YouTube so you don't miss any of the videos, especially if you love Cricut. Thanks.